Hey everyone, and welcome to part 3 of building a full stack web application using Vue.js and Express.js. So if you remember in the last part 2, we kind of pulled in SQLize to connect to the database. And when a user registers, we create a user model and save that. Then we did a little bit of validation and stuff to return different error messages. And then finally, near the end, we started to style this register page to kind of have a more like material looking design to it. So I guess we'll start off going from there, and the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of fix these input labels. So let me go to the Vue.js website again, and we can try to find some other components that we could possibly bring in. So if I go to the left, go to components, maybe I'll do, I think text fields. Yeah, there's a text fields component that we could potentially use. So here are some examples of the text fields or labels, whatever you can use. And again, just to show you like how I kind of do this, I just click on view source. I look through their code really quick and I say, okay, well, they have this as an example. So I'll just go ahead and copy that. So instead of using inputs, let's just use a text field here. And I believe that's all you need to do. And now instead of doing, I can just put the V model on that. I don't even know if you really need any of these. Let's see. Let me go back to this really quick. So I guess there's different styles depending on which one you want. If we just want the normal one, we could just start off with the normal one for now. So if I were to search for normal with hint text label. So I'll actually copy that one. I kind of copied the wrong one. And then inside here I can say v model is equal to email. Let's see, label text will say email, ID. I don't think we even need an ID or a name. So I'm going to get rid of that stuff, save this, and see what it looks like on our page over here. See there, it's already filled out with my username. Cool, so we brought in the Vuetify text field component by just doing view text field or whatever, and just kind of follow the approach that they're using. Then we want to do the same thing for the password down here, so let's go ahead and just copy this, make this password, change this to password, get rid of that input, save this, boom, we have email and we have password here. I'm not sure if they wrap this in anything. No, it's just in a flex. Alright, so I'm not sure why these don't have a black border at the bottom. Like if you go over here, I would rather have a border bottom here, just so you can tell that it's like an actual input box. So what I'm going to do is just find out that class that I need to style. So input group text field. I can just go down to my scoped CSS, and I'm just going to go ahead and say border bottom 1 pixel solid black. In fact, I think this is more of a global setting. I want it to be on all the input boxes. So I'm going to go over here to this app.view, and notice that the style for this is not scoped. So this is globally. So anything here would be global in the whole app. So if I save this, now we have a border underline on these two input boxes. And again, I don't know why I need to do this, because their example says that, there's already a underline. So maybe there's something I did wrong in the setup. Maybe there's something in version 5.2 that broke that underline. Who knows? But anyway, it looks okay now. So let's move on to potentially adding some new features. So again, I like the text. I want the text in this top bar to be white and not to be dark. And I think before, if I go back to the register.view page, I thought if I added dark here, it's supposed to add, like change the colors. Maybe I need to add the dark to that. No? Anyway, it's just another thing I could probably style globally just to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and figure out what class this uses. Toolbar title, right? So I should be able to go to toolbar title, just say give it a color white. So cool, we got a color white there, and so that should be effective for everything. And then we also have button content. I'm pretty sure for the buttons, if I were to go and add a dark attribute to that, I guess it doesn't change. I don't know, something must have changed, or I have something set up where it's not styling like it was before. But anyway, I'll just go ahead and add that. So globally our buttons will have a white colored text, and then our headers will have a white colored text for that. Alright, so at this point, I think it'd be nice to add a fixed header at the top and have, like, you know, the name of the app, maybe like a hamburger menu so I can open up a side nav, and a login and log out register button. So what I'm going to do is, if you go to Vuetify, I think they have a toolbar. So toolbar is one of those components that they have. And again, they have like examples, whatnot. You could view the code to see how exactly you do a toolbar. Again, they have like a ton of different examples, so this is really good documentation. So what we're going to do is, inside our components, let's just go ahead and make something new called header.view, and that's going to represent our view header. So inside here, of course, let me just go ahead and copy an existing one and gut it out. So go here, gut out that code and that code, get rid of all that. Boom. So we have a blank Vue.js file, or sorry, a blank Vue file. And what we want to do is we're just going to say our header is going to be composed of a toolbar, which is fixed, and that's one of the special attributes that you can find in their documentation. Go down here at the bottom, their API says they have a fixed boolean that you can do. Sets the position of the toolbar to be fixed, and that means that it's basically going to stay attached to the top of the screen. Like if you notice this blue bar up here, it's fixed. So if you just add fixed here, it should just become fixed. Go ahead and give it a class assign as well. Go ahead and close that off. So we have a toolbar. Let's go ahead and add a title to it. So v toolbar title, class of margin right 4. We're going to call this tab tracker. Save this, and now at this point we should be able to start using this. So if we go to our app.view page, what we want to do is we want to bring that in. So first of all, we can say components. We want to bring in our header, and of course we need to import that. So I can say import page header from component/header.view. I think header might be a reserved keyword in Vue, so I had to name this the page header. So once we include line 9, which basically brings in that header.view file that we've declared, or component that we declared, we can pass it into this components to allow our app to actually use it. And what we mean by that is we can go over here and actually say page header and put it inside the template here. And now when we save this, make sure there's no, let's see, trailing spaces is not allowed on the header. Maybe that was the issue, yeah. So now if we go back to our client, nice, we have a fixed header at the top. So you saw how easy that was to add something. You basically just read through their docs, look at their examples, copy and paste it into your code, and then change it as needed. And then I'm also just kind of typing this from some notes. to have it look a specific way for me. So first thing you'll notice is this panel right here is a little messed up, and I think we need to do a little bit more work on adding all the Vuetify components. So I think if I go back to the Vuetify thing, I think somewhere they have it and they say you must have your app that looks like this. Pretty sure they say this. So if I were to copy this and put that here, that's probably why like my dark styles aren't working. So basically they say you must have a V app, and inside here you must have a main which has a V container, and then inside the V container we can go ahead and put our router if we want. So I'll go ahead and put the router in. We don't need this image anymore. I'm going to go ahead and put the main page header on side view app there. Oops, I thought I deleted that. So go ahead and delete that. Go ahead and add a fluid attribute, which basically allows it to be a fluid layout. Go ahead and save this, and hopefully that works. Boom. So we have a nice spacing already added for us because that's what Vuetify does for us. Let me just try something out really quick. I wasn't sure. I wanted to add dark here and see what happens without having to actually like hard code. Get rid of this stuff. Yes. Okay, so that whole stuff I added before with the colors we don't actually need, because once we've set up our app to use this particular V app, we can then start using dark onto things that we want to change the text to white. So like in this case, we can add dark to this, save it, and I believe this will become white. Awesome. And then same with the button. If we go to that register, find V button, add dark to it, our text will become white. So that's built into Vuetify. So we don't really need that CSS hack that I did before, so sorry for about wasting time on that. But at least it was fun to figure out how to do globally styled stuff inside that Vue style tag down here at the bottom. And the same with this, I doubt we even need that border bottom anymore because I assume that that's working now. Cool. So it goes to show, make sure you read the docs before you start using, because it says right here you must wrap everything in Vue app, and I wasn't doing that, so shame on me, huh? Alright, so cool. We have a fixed top header here, and what we want to do is over on the right, let's go ahead and add like a login or a log out button, depending on if you're logged in, and then also like a sign up button. So let's go back to our header. So here I'll go to header.vue, and then inside here we can, inside the V toolbar, which again is that cyan colored toolbar, we can add another component which is built into Vuetify called V toolbar items. And inside V toolbar items, we can add, let's say, a button. And that's going to say browse. And we can just make that a flat button and a dark button. See what that does. Oops. Name it browse instead. So this is a browse button. When you click it, it's going to take you to all the songs, but we can implement this later on. Let's go into the very far right. We need to first add a V spacer. And again, these are in the Vuetify docs. But a V spacer is going to pretty much allow you to put things all the way over here fixed to the right. And then at this point, we can say another V toolbar items. And then inside the V toolbar items, let's just go ahead and make another button. Let's make it flat and dark. V button, and what we want to do is name this a sign up button. And just to, so we don't have to worry about this stuff now. Let's just comment out that browse button because we're not really even worrying about that functionality. So we can come back later and, you know, say, add a nice little to-do there so we don't have to come back and fix it up. So now we have a sign up button over here, if you saw that pop up. And what we want to do is we want this to actually navigate us to our register URL. So if I were to go to the base URL here and click sign up, it doesn't do anything because we haven't actually linked it to our Vue router. So one thing that if you go to the Vue router documentation, one way they tell you should do this is by using a, where are the docs? Should be like the first link when you go to a GitHub. Not sure why they have it like hidden. Okay, so router link. All right, so this is kind of one way you can kind of make links work. Basically, you can use a router link, which will wrap whatever you do inside an A tag, and then you can do special stuff like router link to whatever. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Let's just go ahead and put it right in our application. Sign up. I'll say go to the register page. And then we have to verify that we actually have a register page. So if I were to go back to my router, we do have a name called register. And what this does is basically whatever you put in this to, so to equals register, it's going to look through this router routes array and find anything that matches that exact name. And then if you were to click on it, it's going to go ahead and point you or navigate you to that. So you see here, it's now a link with sign up. If I were to click it, it does nothing. And that's because I think maybe I need to just wrap this on the outside. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the button was catching and preventing the propagation down to that sign up event. So one thing I'll point out is this is, again, one way to do your whole router logic. And it kind of wraps your HTML elements with an A tag, if you see here, and it completely jacks up your style. I don't know if there's a better way to do it in Vuetify, so please leave me some feedback if there's a better way to do this. But my approach to a solution is instead of wrapping it with that router link directive or component, instead what we can do is just say if a user were to click on this, let's just go ahead and go to a register page manually. So what we can do is manually, set up a methods here. So on click, we can say methods, and that's going to have a navigate to method. And then we'll say route here. And then when you use Vue.router, basically you have the router object that's put onto every component's local object. So you can access the router by doing this .moneySignRoute, and then I can push a new route by just doing like this. So MoneySignRoute push, and then push the route. In fact, I'll change that to an object like this. Instead of to, I'll put name. So kind of a workaround. Not sure if that's necessary, but it keeps the button completely styled how it should be. And when I click it, it goes to the register page. Oh, maybe not. I'm getting an error. Error in the event handler for click. This .route.push is not a function. Oh, should be router. My bad. So I changed that to router, and now it's working. So if you saw here, I clicked on sign up, and it goes to the register page. Another thing I want to do is I want to be able to click on this logo here and go back to the home page. So again, if I were to go back to the app and go to the header view, we could simply just, I don't know, maybe we should make that a button too. Nah, I don't know. But I'll just make it for now a span. We can come back and change this later. It's not that big of a deal. So make it a span for now. So if anyone were to click on that span, it will navigate them to the root. I don't think I have a root installed, so if I go back here to path and name this root. Now if we click on this, it takes us back to the root of our application. And again, we can do some styling here. Right now, like there's no hover effect, there's no cursor. Let me just do that really quick. It's not that hard to do. So in here, we could say class equals logo. I'll just say home. So now that span has a class of home onto it. If we go down to the scoped styles, we can say pointer is, or cursor is equal to the pointer. Save that. Now we have a cursor when we hover over it. In fact, let's just go ahead and do like home hover color is, pick some random color. Cool. And we can change that color later on. But again, recap, we added a fixed view toolbar header by doing, let's say, a view toolbar fixed, gave it a class of cyan and dark so that the text is white. Remember, dark makes the text white. Cyan changes the color. So we can go over here, we can change this like green. See how it changes to green, or I don't know, blue. And there's a bunch of colors already defined on Vuetify. So if I go to the style drop down and go to colors, we could basically use any of these colors. So they have like, ooh, that one's cool. Let's use orange darken 2. So if we go over here, change that to orange darken 2 and go back to our app. Awesome. But in this case, let's just keep it as cyan. Save that and start moving on to something new, such as the login page. So for the login page, we already have a way to register, right? But we don't really have a way to keep track of the state if the user's already registered or logged in. So let's go ahead and work on adding a login component, which we can, have a link up here called login. So let's just go ahead and go to that header. We can go down here and say, let's just go ahead and add a new button called login. So I'm going to go ahead and say login, and when we click it, it's going to go to a login state. So we have login here, click it, goes to login state, but login state does not exist yet. So if you remember, you need to go to your route or router. We need to go ahead and add a login state, which means we need a login component, which we haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and copy a login component. So go to register, and I'm just going to copy and paste the register component because it's going to be very similar, right? So now if I were to just go through here, and anywhere it says register, let's just go ahead and rename to login. And then for this logic, we're probably not going to use it. Actually, we might. So right now we're kind of assuming there's a login method on this service. But there's not. So let's just go ahead and save and see if this works. All right, so now we're at a login page. We have this login panel, email and password. We have a login button. If we were to click login, this should just throw an error, mainly because login is not defined yet. So you saw how easy it was to add a new link, add a new view, add a new component called the login component, and we basically just copy and paste register, and we could just change it as needed. So now at this point, what we want to do is actually invoke a login endpoint with this email and password. So if you remember, if we go to Authentication service, so So I'll go over here to services, authentication service. We don't have a login method, so let's go ahead and create one. So if I were to copy and paste this, change this to login, we want to do a post request to a login endpoint with these credentials. Again, I think this is fine. Just present an error if there's a login error. Call login from authentication service with email and password, and I think honestly we're good to go with that. Got a little syntax error. Thank you, Webpack. So now at this point, if I were to type in test@gmail.com, password 123456, we hit login and we go to the network tab. We see that it does make a request to /login using a post request. It's pasting the payload, email, and password here. And it's returning a 404 not found. And why is that? Well, it's because we haven't actually implemented a login endpoint. All right, so let's move on to the backend and try to implement that login endpoint. So if I open up the server package and first go to routes, we can just go ahead and copy these routes, and what I'm going to do is just indent that and go to login. And basically, we actually don't need a policy for this one at the moment, or let's not even focus on a policy. So let's just focus on adding a new login method to the authentication controller. So I'll save that file and I'll go over to authentication controller. Let's go ahead and add a new async login method. And inside this method, we're going to do, let me just copy and paste this code. What we need to do is first find a user which matches the email that's passed in, right? So the first thing we need to do is grab that email and password that the user has passed in their body. So we could do that on line 16. And then instead of creating a user here, we need to find one. So find one user where the email is equal to the email that the user has passed in. And we can do that like so. So instead of using create, we do find one. This should return a user object. And if it doesn't return a user object, it could be undefined or null. What we need to do is say if that user object is not defined, let's go ahead and send back a 403, which is the authentication error status, and then just say error, the login information was incorrect. It's typically a good idea to return generic messages back to the user when you're dealing with authentication or logging in, just so that a hacker doesn't, find a way to figure out all the different users that are in their system. So again, we grab the email and password from the body. We find one user in the database that matches the email. We check that we actually found something, and if not, we're going to return a 403 status. Make sure you have return there. And then finally, what we need to do is say, is password valid? We need to verify that the password the user passed in matches the password that's attached to the user model. So I could do this, is password valid equals password equals user.password, and then say if the password is not valid, again, we're going to do that same logic to just return a 403 and just say the login information was incorrect. And then at this point, if everything was good to go, we're just going to return that user. So I'll say user JSON is equal to user.toJSON, and we can send that back here. And again, if there's any type of error whatsoever, we can just, again, return like valid login information. Actually, I'll say an error has occurred trying to log in. And in this case, I think that might be like a 500 error, because if for some reason you failed to make that SQLized call, then it's pretty sure there's something wrong with the server. So return 500 status to the user so they understand that it wasn't their fault. So at this point, we can go ahead and try to test that endpoint. So if I were to go and make sure that we have an account registered, We do. Then we go here and try to log in. It says the login information was incorrect. And so let's try to figure out why that's happening. It may not even be finding that user in the database. So it's finding a user. You see how it printed out user here. So it should not be getting to that. Let's print out what's happening here. It's printing out false. It's saying password is not equal to user.password. So let's go ahead and just do a little bit more debugging and try to figure out why this is having issues. And the password that user has is 123456, and the password expects is 78. So for whatever reason, I am not sure why that user has password linked to 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the app.js. I'm pretty much going to clear out the database. So if you, in Sequelize, if you do .sync and then pass this force flag, it basically drops all of your tables. So this is very dangerous in a production environment. But when testing locally, if you want a clean database, you can just go ahead and add that and then run it. So now that that is ran, we should not have a single user in our database. So I'm going to go back to register with testing, and then log in with this. And it let us log in this time. Cool. So we want to do JWT or Java or Json Web Tokens for kind of our authentication method. So the first thing we need to do is install a package called Json Web Token. So I'll say npm install save Json Web Token. And while that's installing, basically we can come up here and say const JWT is equal to require Json Web Token. And we also want to go ahead and just include that config file that we had created earlier. And I'll write a helper function called JWT sign user, which basically is a function which is going to sign a user object using the JWT library to give us back a JWT token. So I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to declare this variable called 1 week, which is basically 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours in a day times 7 days in a week. And I'm going to return jwt.sign, give it the user. I'm going to give it, the second argument is some like options. So I'll say authentication.jwt secret. And then the third one is some more options where you can actually pass in the expires in. So in here in config, let's go ahead and define an authentication key. And we can say JWT secret is equal to process env JWT secret or secret. And basically what this is going to be used for is signing the JWT token. You typically need to pass it a secret string, and that secret is only known by the server. And basically it's used to determine if the JWT token is valid or not. Because technically anyone can go to jwt.io and create their own token and try to send it to my server. But if they don't know what this secret is, then my server is going to be like, yo, that's a bad token, and just reject it. And we'll see this used later on when we bring in Passport and start validating using Passport. But for now, our goal is to just send back a JWT token when the user signs in. So again, we have this helper method. And what we need to do is down here, we could just send back token JWT sign user and pass it to user JSON here. So now when I save this file and go back and hit my login endpoint, we get back our user information, and we also get back our token. Alright, so now as you might have seen, when we register a user, it's storing the password in plain text. And that's again another security concern. You shouldn't be doing that. So let's go ahead and try to fix that issue by just using Bcrypt and encrypting the password. So yet again, we're going to install another package, and this one's going to be called Bcrypt Node.js. And basically it's a package you can use for encrypting and salting and hashing passwords or whatnot. So maybe I should rephrase that. I'm not going to encrypt the password. I'm just going to add a hash with a salt hash so we can easily check to see if the password that's sent in by the user matches what we expect in the database. So now that Bcrypt is done installing, if we were to go back to the user model, I'm going to go ahead and include that Bcrypt package. And I'm going to promisify all of that Bcrypt package. I like to use Bluebird as the promise library. I don't remember if we already brought that in, so let me just go over here, npm install Bluebird. And basically, promisify all is going to take any typical function which has like a callback structure, and it's going to wrap it to allow us to use the promise format. And again, I don't know how much that really matters since we're typically going to be using async and await where possible. So this might not even be used. Let me just try to write this out and see if we need it. So I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm first going to say change this to that because I need the actual reference to the user object. I need to return the user object here. So that was just like a little refactoring just so I have access to user here. And what I want to do is I want to, on the prototype, attach a method called compare password. And that's so that the user model is kind of the one that's doing the password compare instead of the controller. And that's useful if we need to do like password comparisons anywhere else. So starting off, instead of doing that compare password where I do password is equal to user password, we expect the password to now be encrypted. So what we need to do is return bcrypt compare async candidate password. Actually, I'll change this to candidate. Actually, I'll just keep that as password. Why not? So compare the password to the model's password. In fact, change that to function because we don't want to use the fat arrow. So assuming that the password is stored using Bcrypt, we can just compare the password that the user sends in against the model's password. So again, any user object now is going to have that method. So instead of having to do this logic up here, we could just say user.compare password. I could pass it password. And I could say await, since that's going to return a promise, I believe. And now that's going to call this method, which is going to use bcrypt to compare that password against the model's password. And the second thing we want to do is before we store the user, we instead want to hash the password. So if I were to go here and say hooks, I can add a couple of callback functions. So I'll say before the object is created, we want to hash the password. We want to say before the object is updated, hash the password, and before we save this object, also hash the password. And then up here, we can go ahead and just declare function hash password. And that takes a user object and an options. And so the method for hashing the password, we first need a salt factor, which is just used by Bcrypt. Not sure what happens really behind the scenes. I have to look into that. But the second step is we need to check if the password has changed at all. So if the password hasn't changed, we can just go ahead and return out of this hash password function and not do anything. Otherwise, we need to call Bcrypt. We need to tell it to generate, which is gen salt async, using the salt factor. We need to then take that salt and then Bcrypt using the user's password. So basically we just take the plain text password and we salt it, which will give us a hash, which we can then update that user's password value with that hash. So at this point, let's just go ahead and do force true again to clear out the database of all those bad passwords. And I can go back to here, go to the register endpoint, go ahead and register that user. It's saying the account is already in use, so I probably have some type of like exception that's being thrown. So let's first make sure that we're getting into this hash password function. Okay, so I guess it didn't clear the password last time. So now you see that we registered and we got a user back with a strange looking hash of a password. At this point, what we can do is if we were to try to log in, it's going to check that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 string password against the hash to verify if it works or not. So I can go back to here and just remove that. Okay, so let me just recap again really quick what all changed. So inside routes, we added a login endpoint, which calls the authentication controller login method. And then we went to authentication controller. We added this login method, which basically grabs the username and password from the body. We find the user using the email. We check if there wasn't an email or a user returned, we just returned an error. If for whatever reason the password they passed in does not match the user's password, return an error. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and return a JWT token with that user information. And that's about it for that. And then the register endpoint we didn't change. We did add this JWT sign user helper method, which is used for generating that JWT token. And then inside the user model, we added some hooks, which basically run whenever or before we create the object, update the object, or save the object, what calls the hash password method up here, which basically takes that user password and hashes it, and then saves it again. And then finally, we added a prototype method called compare password so that any user model we can call compare password as needed. And in fact, just to make things a little bit easier, let's just go ahead and do the exact same thing for register. Like we can return a JWT token after they register. Otherwise, I think the user would have to call login after registering to get that JWT token, which I don't know. I don't know what the better approach is for this, but that's basically how we're going to go forward with that. So at this point, let's go ahead and go back to the UI. Remember we had that login endpoint that we created. And let's verify that it actually works. So if I go, I think the account was testing or test. Yeah. Oops. Testing@gmail.com. Password is 1234567 If we were to hit that login endpoint, does it work? Yes, it returned us the token and the user. And again, we did change the register method, so let's go back here and try registering with something. Regression test manually. So yes, it allowed us to register. We got back a token, and we also got back a user. And if I were to try to log in with that user, we got back those things. One thing I'm noticing is it's allowing us to type in a plain text into the password instead of having stars, so that's no good. So let's go back to the client and go back to register endpoint. I think we can just say type is equal to password here and do the same thing for the login controller. Okay. That's working. And I think one more thing, I'm kind of annoyed how on the register page it's autofilling. It's fine for login to autofill, but I don't think that's good for the register page. So there is a autocomplete new password attribute you can pass in to input boxes. And that should prevent it from autofilling. And I think it's also a good practice to like wrap everything in a form. I think like Internet Explorer might need the form thing, and then Chrome uses this other thing. It's just kind of a pain, but whatever. So hopefully now it doesn't autofill the register page. Good, it doesn't. Because it doesn't make sense to me to autofill the register page. But login, that's cool for it autofills. I don't really care about that. All right, so what we want to do now is we have the ability to log in and register, and we get back that JWT token. At this point, let's bring in the Vuex library for the front end, which is if I go to Vuex npm, or maybe I should go to GitHub, not really sure. Probably GitHub has better documentation. Basically, Vuex is the equivalent to Redux, which is the Flux implementation. You can go through these docs if you want to, but basically when your application gets larger and you have components kind of interacting with other components, the original approach was to use like message passing. So like your parent component would use props to pass down to your children, and your children would use events to propagate up to the parent. And that's fine, or you could use like a message bus to kind of communicate between all your components. And I think it's fine for small applications, but everyone always says that it gets out of hand when an application gets larger. I'm not really sure if that's the case because they don't really have that in Angular 1, and I didn't see an issue with message passing becoming an issue in Angular 1. Maybe my application wasn't big enough. But anyway, they say you should be using Vuex for something like that if you need to keep track of a state that's used throughout your application. And in fact, that token that we're passing back and the user ID, those are two things that we want to keep track of throughout the entire application. So it makes sense to use Vuex here. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, do an npm install, but this time on the client. I'll go ahead and install Vuex. And then I'm also going to install something called Vuex Router Sync. And it's a good way to kind of sync your router to your Vuex Vuex store. So while those two are installing, let's go back to our front end, close all of these tabs to make this all manageable. Go back to source, we can go back to main. And here, let's go ahead and import the sync from Vuex router sync. And we can go ahead and say sync store to router. We need to import a store, which we're going to have to define ourselves. So import store from store/store, which means we need to create a store folder. Inside the store, let's go ahead and make a store.js. So basically inside your store, let's go ahead and import Vue. Let's import Vuex. Let's tell Vue to use Vuex. That basically allows you to access your store and all of your Vue components. And then we can go ahead and create the store. I think I could just do that. Export default new Vue store. I'm going to say strict is true, which means that you can never modify the state unless it's through an action or a mutation. For state, I'm going to go ahead and just put token null and then user null. And I'll also say is user logged in. I'll say false. So these are kind of the global states of our application that we want to keep track of, and they can be used for like adding stuff to the headers or changing what's displayed in the header or side nav, depending if you're logged in or not. And I'll go ahead and add a couple of mutations. Actually, I think it might make more sense if I just keep it, start with 1 and then add on later. So how Vuex works is you have your actions, your mutations, and your state. Basically, you should always invoke your actions from your Vue components. So your actions are basically just like event names. So I could say set token, which is going to take in a commit as a first argument and a token as a second. And then inside your actions, you typically want to call your commit or do your async calls. Basically, this is where you do any type of async logic. And then inside your mutations, you'd have a method with the same name as that. But in this case, we're going to take a state and then whatever the second parameter we pass in, which is a token. So here we're basically saying, call the mutation called set token and pass it that token object. And then inside here, we can say state.token is equal to token. So it's kind of a lot of extra work just to freaking change the value of a token. But I guess it's supposed to allow your application to be easier to follow. Because you know that in order for this to change, you must be invoking you must invoke a mutation. And in order to invoke a mutation, typically you want to invoke an action. But okay, so how does this help us, right? So when we log in, if we go back to that logging.vue component, at this point, if we keep track of the response that was returned, which will have the username and the password, or username and the token, we can use that and call that action using dispatch. We can say set token response.token, and basically that's going to call our store's set token method, which is going to call our mutation set token, which is going to update our state to token. And then we could do the same thing with a set user. So response, I think actually it should be response data user and response data token. So same idea with register. Go ahead and just copy and paste that code. Same idea set token and set user based on whatever we got registered or whatever was returned from that register endpoint. And then I'll go ahead and save that. All right, so let's go ahead and just force refresh the page just in case. And for Vuex, you can install a Chrome plugin called, I think it's called Vue. I don't know what it's called, but if you search the Chrome store, it's called Vue DevTools. So if you install that, you basically can keep track of the events that are firing off and how they're affecting your application. So like in this case, if I were to change this to testing@gmail.com, change the password to that, and hit login, we are getting an error back. Okay, so I was kind of looking through the code and I found that I needed to add S. It was mutation and I needed to add an S. And then also I'm like jumping the gun right here. I'm trying to call set user and we haven't even defined set user. So that's an oopsie on my part again. So let's just go ahead and allow us to also set a user state. So set user is null. And hopefully this will work this time. I'm just going to hard refresh just in case there's like any type of caching issue. Please work. No. Is it because I use a lowercase u there? Probably. Moment of truth. Oh, my page refreshed. Oops. Alright, sorry, this is getting kind of annoying, but you know, debugging is part of programming, so you got to get used to spending 20 minutes debugging something where you've left off a character or something. Alright, I'm going to pause this video and I'll come back when it's fixed because I'm wasting too much time. Alright, so I realized that in the main.js file, I completely forgot to add to add store. So before, Vue had no idea how to even access the store, but now it should be able to access the store now. So let me just refresh this page and try that one last time. Cool, it worked. So now in this Vue Dev Tools, you can actually see every time that we commit an action and the state changes, we can kind of check how this state is changing over time. And if we want to, we can actually like revert and time travel back to like the state of the application before I set those tokens, and then time travel forward. And we'll see how this can be useful later on when I'm trying to hide these login and sign up tokens up here. So let's actually try to use those, right? So if we were to go to the header now, and we only want to show these if the user is not logged in. So what I could do is just add another state, say is user logged in, set that to false, and I could say if token is defined, go ahead and say state.isUser logged in is equal to true. Otherwise, set it to false. And then I could use this is user logged in if I were to go to the header component here. In fact, let me just delete this hello component. It's like, are we even using this still? Yeah, I guess we are. I'll keep that. So anyway, the header component, if I wanted to hide those two items, I could simply do v-if, and then I could say store.state.isUser logged in. So this will only display if that is true. fact, I added that to the wrong thing. So let me add it to the button. Same thing here. I'll add it to the button. So only display it if the user is not logged in. So I'll go ahead and negate that. Save that file, and hopefully these are hidden now. I think I need to re-log in one more time. All right, so after we logged in, you saw that those two links actually disappeared from the header. And I can go back and time travel to like different states. So in this state, user and token and is logged in as false. In this state, token is defined, is user logged in is true. User is null for some reason. I think that's because we totally forgot to uncomment that code here. So I will do that, change that to response data token. Make sure registers all look good. Let me just hard refresh this and retest that one more time. So I keep getting all these like teeny little bugs, and that's because I'm moving too fast. So just a little piece of advice, slow it down and relax. You don't have to like be a speed coder, because the faster you go, the more chances you're going to make stupid mistakes. So hopefully I'll slow it down in these future videos. All right, so now the user's defined here, we can go back and time travel, and we can see those links appearing and disappearing as we change our state. All right, so like always, let's do a quick little recap. So we brought in the Vuex module. Inside the main.js, we went ahead and included Vue router sync, and we included the store. We told Vue router sync to sync the store to the router, and then we also make sure you include line 29, set up Vue to use that store. And then inside this project, the client project, we created a store folder. We created a store.js export, which basically says pretty much tells Vue to use Vuex. We create a Vuex store. We tell it to use strict mode. We created these 3 different state variables that we're going to be using throughout our entire application. And then we created the actions and mutations that are needed to kind of change those as needed. And then lastly, in the login and register endpoints, we are keeping track of the response that's returned from the server, and we are setting token and setting user based on those 2 responses. And we're going to use these 2 later on. Right now we're kind of only focused on is user logged in, but these will be useful later on. And then lastly, in the header, we wanted to hide certain navigation based on that state. So we're saying hide the login button and hide the sign up button if the user is logged in. All right, so that pretty much wraps up part 3. I think we did a lot of extra work getting everything set up with the registration and login, and then brought in a couple of new modules. So I think it's good to have a little break here, maybe make part 4 in a little bit after this is all sunk in. Thanks for watching. Again, I'm Cody Seibert, and feel free to follow my Twitter to get updates as to when I release part 4. All right, thanks for watching.